Endurance sport, ultra running, Ironman distance triathlons, and beyond. The endurance world is out there right now, and it's available at the click of the button to anyone on the internet. But there is a process, there are plans, there are ways of training which all need to be considered and taken into a training plan consideration. So why is it that we do this? Hello and welcome to the Ultra Running Podcast with me, Coach Marshy. I hope you're all well and I hope your training is going well. I'm certainly on the right path to recovery at the moment and on my journey back to ultra running, which is also available in a daily vlog over on my YouTube channel. So we are going to bring in today's guest. So welcome to the show, Ben. How are you, Ben?
Very good, thank you. Great to be on. Looks very professional, must say, on here. I'm honoured
Thanks
to be
very
on
much.
such a cool show. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, obviously, Ben, we've kind of met a few times over the years, mainly through where I worked, and sort of in the running world. So, do you want to just tell everyone who's listening or watching what it is you do, who you are, what you do on a daily basis, and what your kind of link to running is as well?
Yeah, sure. I think the last time we met was in the showers at Impington Village College. So
Yeah, it was, yeah.
So, yeah, I've seen the Fat Man To Ironman there. Definitely seen that. No, I'm getting on a bit now, unfortunately. So I've been in this endurance sport game for a long time. Started off with rowing, really. When I was at college, that's when I first got serious. Started doing a bit of running as training for that, and then met a guy I used to row with who was doing triathlon. And from that, I got completely hooked on triathlon and duathlon as well, which is run, bike, run. And got to a pretty high level in that. Alongside that, I was always teaching and coaching. So I'm a teacher. I'm still a teacher part-time now, but I teach languages and some PE. And been involved in race organisation, which we may talk about later. So my life is really a mixture of teaching, coaching, and that's coaching runners, triathletes, and other endurance athletes as well, and a bit of race organising as well. That's the sort of sporting side of me, anyway. To be
Cool.
brief.
So, it's quite a bit to unpack there, and let's kind of go through it a little bit. So, obviously, you know, you mentioned that you've been in this game a little while now, the endurance world, and over the years of being in it, have you sort of noticed a kind of more greater participation generally?
Certainly in recent years, yeah. I mean, there's been both a running boom and a cycling boom. The cycling boom's been massive in recent years. I think probably since 2012 we've seen that. The running boom's perhaps been more gradual, but then that was accelerated with park run coming in, and of course this ultra running, which is taking off, isn't it? I mean, ultra running, let's say 7 or 8 years ago, was something that people said, oh, that's for people who are slow and just want to do something where they can achieve a bit better because they're too slow to do any good in anything else. Well, I said that about triathlon 20 years ago. I might have been right in some ways. But now ultra running, of course, has taken off. I was surprised to hear actually recently that there's still not much money in it. So even these huge events or very famous events like Western States and all these, they don't really have prize money. There's only a few events that have prize money. So I think I'll be very surprised if we don't see in the next few years the sport becoming a bit more monetized and a bit more professional, let's say. And obviously it's not just about that, but I think that top end tends to drive the participation at the other end of things as well. So yeah, definitely a boom throughout the endurance world, I would say.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny how you say that about the sort of top end driving the grassroots end, because my kind of take on triathlon, I was probably in that process that you referred to there, where that boom happened, and I was probably someone that went from being like a fat, overweight uni student to ending up doing an actual Ironman, and that was probably because of that boom of the Olympics and the interest that we had, you know, around someone that we both have met, Will Clark, and you know, obviously the Brownlee brothers, and you know, that boom happened and it became something that I wanted to get involved in as just an everyday citizen that wasn't really interested in endurance sport at all. And then you say about the ultra world as well, and that is starting to change slowly. In a previous episode that we recorded was with Mike Jones, the owner of UTS Ultra Trail Snowdonia, and he was very much talking about how the top end isn't there yet, but that some of the bigger companies in the world are now looking to drive that a little bit. And I think Ironman themselves have got involved with the UTMB. So
that's correct. They have. Yeah, definitely have. And I know a lot of one shoe company in particular, the Hoka and Oni, they came very heavily into triathlon a few years ago. And I know now they're getting heavily into the ultra world. So they're obviously identifying it as a growth area.
And would you say, sort of as someone who's been in and around the sports of endurance over the years, that is this a good thing?
About the ultra, do you mean specifically?
Yeah, specifically about the ultra, but also in general in terms of the endurance sports.
I think it's great in general. The fitter the population can be, the better it is for everybody. And it's a special sort of enjoyment and health that we get from regularly doing sport. I think that's brilliant throughout, and whatever your bag is. Ultra running specifically, I think maybe a few people go into it a bit blind, and they maybe do themselves a bit of damage because they don't listen to podcasts like yours and prepare properly.
Yeah.
So, I think it's not, it's running 50, 100K, 100 miles, doing these backyard things, whatever it may be. It's not a particularly normal thing in the sense that it's not what we're used to. It's not what society's used to, but it's also not what the body's used to. So to get yourself to do that, you've got to be gradual and you've got to build up in a sensible way and take the right precautions. So I'd be worried if, instead of the London Marathon, we had the London 100 mile and there was 40,000 people lining up who hadn't trained properly. But in general, I do think it's a good thing. And I think it's great that people are getting out into new terrain, running off road, enjoying a new type of sport. It sounds like a lot of these courses are really picturesque. There's technique involved in climbing, descending, getting through different types of surfaces. It's interesting as well.
Yeah, no, I sort of echo what you're saying there about the idea of there being maybe like the 100-mile ultra London Marathon or whatever. And I think something that I often refer to, but to be honest, it's very anecdotal. I don't have any proof of this, but when I started running in 2009, doing a half marathon was considered quite a big thing. And then it kind of progressed on to the marathon. And although that was my natural journey, now it's almost like to the everyday population that a marathon is no longer enough. And, I've got this impression talking to people out there that they want more. They want the next thing. And ultra running is obviously quite an obvious thing for that. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that at all.
Yeah, I heard you say that. I know exactly what you mean. I think that is true for a certain section of the sporting population. Yeah, the ones who are driven by that desire to see how far they can go or how far they can push themselves. And like you say, I think, as you quite rightly say, that a half marathon is now, in that section of the population anyway, not seen as that big a deal. And likewise the marathon, and from the marathon it's the Ironman, isn't it? And then I think from the Ironman people do go into ultra running or even the ultra distance triathlons as well, because you get these double Ironmans and Ultraman and all that, which is perhaps even more crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that was particularly highlighted on the news in recent years was is it Louise Minchin, the BBC presenter, did the one in Norway where you jump off the back of the boat first to swim?
That's right, Norseman. Yeah. That's sort of an extreme triathlon. So it's still iron distance, but it's extreme. Yeah. I've coached a few people to do some of those. There's a fantastic one in Patagonia in South America that a guy I coached did. Yeah, they really do take you to some amazing places, these events, don't they?
Yeah, no, I think that's, you end up in places that you never expected to go to. But do you think the body is, us as evolution has gone and how we're made up as humans, the body is made to be pushed, right? But just we perhaps don't realize that.
Oh, that is too difficult a question for me.
Yeah.
It's all, people often say, we weren't designed to do that, or, the body does this, or the body thinks. And when you think about that's actually rubbish, isn't it? The body doesn't think, whether we were designed or not, that's open to question, isn't it? Some people believe we were, some people we don't, some people believe it's all down to evolution and so on. I'm not going to, pontificate one way or another on that. I keep an open mind on that. All I see is the effect that sport has, what the different events do. And I think the body is certainly capable of doing that. And the body is resilient. We see in ultra distance events, whether it's running or triathlon, how well women do. The further we go, the more strenuous in a way the event, the closer they get to the men. And obviously the woman's body copes with childbirth. It's maybe more resilient than a man's in some ways. And I think that shows how these events do push limits, but the body is incredible at adapting. And as long as we don't try to make it adapt too quickly or do silly things in the process, it is certainly capable of handling these things.
Yeah.
Great to see when it's amazing when it does, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is when you pull it off. But, also being at various different points in my journey, up and down as a bit of a yo-yo at times, I've seen those highs when you complete an Ironman, and you can't blag an Ironman. No one can blag an Ironman. Like you could, turn up to a 5-10K and blag it, but you can't blag an Ironman. And then, the other side of things, when you start at the bottom of that process, or in my case at the moment, sort of on a journey back to ultra running, following injury, the lows, the end of like struggle through endurance. And as you say, that adaptation process can become if you go too fast, then you just end up on the sidelines injured. So
yeah, many factors in that. Perhaps one of the greatest ones is age. So I think the younger you are, the more quickly you adapt and the easier it is to get away with things. And I think once we get a bit older, then we have to be extra careful. And, as I think one of your previous guests was saying, one of the biggest factors is previous injury. So if you have had a previous injury, you have to be very careful when you test your body in the same way to go beyond where you've been before. But if everyone can achieve at a certain level, can't they? I mean, you say you can't blag it, but you can do it, an Ironman, you can do it in 8 hours, or you can do it in 17, and you're still going to do it, and it's still just as great an achievement,
absolutely.
And I think, it's still important to recognize that.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned there about the injuries and that process for yourself. Have you noticed that both in your coaching role and in your own journey, that as age kind of progresses on, are people struggling to get back to similar levels that they hit when they were younger?
It certainly takes longer to recover when you get older. That's absolutely certain, regardless of how much fitness and strength you've got. That's still going to be a slow process when you're older. I mean, I notice if I fall off my bike now, it takes longer to heal. And if I have a cold or COVID or whatever, you've got to be that bit more careful when you come back than perhaps would have been 20 years ago. So yeah, there is that aspect. But having said that, you get wiser as well. You know how to pace yourself. You become more aware and conscious of what level you're working at. And I think your body and your mind together help each other to break through new barriers in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with your own sort of experience, your own journey of endurance sports, what would you say the most extreme thing is that you've ever done?
Good question.
Well, not necessarily in distance either, just in terms of maybe like altitude or temperature or whatever.
Well, the first time I raced for GB age group team, I went on to race elite afterwards. But at age group level, my first ever world championship was in duathlon, was out in Mexico in Cancun, and that was like 38 degrees and 95% humidity. We got there on the Wednesday for a Sunday race and just went out for a 20-minute jog at 7:00 in the morning. And I didn't think I could do another step, but by the Sunday we were racing okay, and got through it. So that was quite extreme. I think the race that hurt the most was when I did a Belfast marathon. And that was because I hadn't done a training run of more than an hour leading up to it. So the last 10K of that, I think probably a lot of your listeners have can identify what it's like when you get to the end of a running race, whether it's a marathon or further, and your body doesn't want to know, but your mind wants you to get there. So, yeah, I had a photo on my wall for a couple of years after that of this face contorted in pain as I was trying to finish that race. I've done an Ironman as well, an iron distance race, but that was actually all right. I actually got through that not too bad.
Which one did you do?
This is back in the day, something called the Longest Day Triathlon, which was the British iron distance or long distance champs, as they called it in those days. Yeah.
So was that before the sort of commercialization of Ironman and
Ironman existed, but there wasn't one in England. There wasn't
Right.
one in England at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So people were already going to Kona and so on, but yeah, I got through that, and we did it on a bike that probably didn't fit me, and no disc wheels or anything like that, but still got through in about 9.5 hours. So it was all right. I was pleased with it in the end.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting sport, really. It's interesting that I did one on a previous journey and went all the way up to Ironman and then didn't want to continue. It's almost like a tick the box and that'll do.
Yeah.
And I'll move on to running. And then, like, I think, as you mentioned earlier, that there was this natural progression to then go, right, what's next? Ultra distances. That's what I'm going to do. So that was kind of my story around getting to an Ironman. But obviously, you've gone into the coaching side as well. So, in terms of the types of athletes that you're working with, is it obviously you mentioned that you're doing a bit of PE teaching as well? So there's a bit of coaching involved there. But what is the range of athletes that you're working with mainly?
It really is the whole range. I would say that the greatest now, I mean, I don't have a huge amount of athletes. I've got a little group out in Italy as well. I'm half Italian, and some of my friends out there, I'm sort of linked to the Savona Triathlon Club. I'll give them a shout out. Yeah, so I've got a group from there that I coach, and they're sort of guys who are aiming to do, say, sub 10 for an Ironman and sort of the 40-minute 10K type range, and that tends to be true of quite a lot of the people I coach. I don't know why that is, but there seems to be a little focus around that. But I've got like a Wednesday night running group, and there we've got people who are much slower than that, who are around the 25 minutes for a park run, perhaps even a bit slower, right through to sort of 17 or just under as well. So I haven't got any top elites at the moment. I've worked with one or two in the past, but I'd say some sort of top age group level right down to beginner. I've coached someone who couldn't swim 25 meters in January, and then she did an Ironman in the August. So it's the whole range, and I get just as much out of it, regardless of what level they're performing at. And it's runners, triathletes, duathletes, cyclists. Yeah, it's great.
And when you're kind of going through that training process with them, in terms of like the base training, so most people that listen to me regularly understand what I do for a day job as well. But just from your perspective, when you're building up that base endurance, what kind of for the iron distances and the longer stuff, sort of how many hours are you recommending these guys are putting in per week at the peak level?
Right, again, that has to be tailored to what people can cope. So everyone is different. I would not ever put a blanket amount on it. I mean, when I was running at my best, my sort of sweet spot was 60 miles a week. If I went much over that, I knew it'd be too much, whereas there are other guys who might do double that, others who might do less. So I think you have to watch people as they train, get the feedback, and really see what happens. As a very general thing, I would say, if you can't do more than 12 hours of training in your peak weeks for an Ironman, you're probably going to struggle. You're probably going to be walking part of it and freewheeling part of the bike, probably. But that's just a very general overview. I wouldn't, people could do it on less than that, I'm sure. But in my experience, that's probably a minimum to have an enjoyable day out on your Ironman.
Yeah, and that idea that everyone is different. I as a coach would also agree. I think you can't ever put a number on it, but from my perspective, that then makes things like Google very dangerous.
Indeed.
And I think as a coach, I don't know how you do it, but I try not to. I'm not here to like plug it down anyone's throats or try and convince anyone. I will give the information, and hopefully they apply that information and use it as as like me being their coach. They take that on board and try and
Yeah.
apply what I say. But that whole Google thing being dangerous it can
Yeah,
be quite a headache, right?
sure. And I think, as I'm getting older and I've been teaching a very long time, and I've been coaching a long time, and you see how things go in cycles, and you see how different approaches become the flavor of the month or the flavor of the year, and it's very important, I think, as a coach, to look at what the evidence is in front of your eyes, not believe what everybody else is doing or thinking because he's doing it, I've got to do it. I've seen it go through the phases of everyone wanting to do this HIIT training, everyone wanting to do huge mileage, low fat ketosis thing, massive focus on strength. Like if you did strength training, the rest would take care of itself. You see all these things sort of cycle round, and the truth is it's a combination. There's some truth in all of it, and for some people some things work well, for others it doesn't, and you have to find the right blend for the individual. And I think listening to your athletes is the most ignored part of some of these online so-called coaching platforms. Or if you Google a 16-week plan for an Ironman, it's just going to have something there which will fit perfectly for one person but be a disaster for the next one.
Yeah, no, I had a similar conversation actually this week, which was around that, in terms of the theory is great, the sports science is great, but that doesn't take into account the single mother of 3 who's trying to do an ultra marathon and tries to work full time as well. That doesn't apply to her, because she can't do that. So we were having that conversation, and it was really interesting that you would just read a book or Google something, and then people take it as gospel.
Yeah, and I think if you listen to some of the top coaches, certainly in triathlon, you'll hear a lot of them will tell you that the sports science, some of them are sports scientists themselves, but the more they coach, the more they realize that the science is not what makes them good coaches. I think sports science as a whole field is not the greatest area of science. It's very, very often small sample sizes. When these papers come out and say, oh yeah, you've got to do polarized training, that's what works best. You're looking at a very small proportion of people. It's usually more men than women, usually athletes of a certain level, and there are hundreds of little factors there which make sports science not the greatest area of science. I think we have to take sports science papers as information, but not as a prescriptive thing. And certainly feeling and feedback are the greatest things that will help you progress and help a coach understand you.
Yeah, I think, but with a sports science background myself, I totally agree that the clients that I'm working with and they're getting the best results, I'm taking what I've read. You use that term, it's information.
Exactly.
And I'm trying it out. We're playing with it. We're applying it. And if bits work, we put it in. It's like absorb as a sponge, and then take the bits that work for each individual, is how I would approach it. And it sounds like you're very, very similar with that. So
I mean, I'm very interested in, I try and keep up with it as best as I can. And I love hearing about it and hearing how it's worked with certain people, but certainly no one should take it as read or as a proven method for going faster or longer. Yeah. Apart from maybe we can now accept that the carbon shoes do make most people go a bit faster. But they get people injured as well. So you can't win with anything, really.
No, and I think, the one that proves that the most is if you pick up a journal and you look for conclusive evidence, you will find that, like, for recovery, sleep and hydration work. If you then start looking at research around foam rollers, sticks, guns, all of those things, there's as many studies that say it works that say it doesn't work. There's studies that go both ways with that. Whereas like sleep does work, but that's just a general rule for life. That isn't about sports science. That's just life.
Sure. But even then you get some people who will be very much more able to perform on 6 hours sleep than others. Some will need 8, some will need 6. Hydration, you look at the marathon runners there. I can't remember if it was Kipchoge or somebody else, or no, it was Haile Selassie did
Gabriel Selassie,
who he lost kilos in his, he didn't, he was dehydrated, and yet he still kept the pace the whole way to the end, you know. But I totally agree with you. It's definitely the right approach to be. Speaking of someone who's had kidney stones, I'm definitely going to keep hydrated for the rest of my life. But but again, you know, what works for one doesn't work for the other. Yeah, and some people can push things more than others.
And it's a can of worms, because unfortunately I find, and it's good because actually maybe it's not unfortunate, because the Google debate, it creates a discussion with your athletes. The challenge that you sometimes find in a big group of athletes when they're training together is that, like you said, maybe because there's a norm and one person's doing it, it's quite hard to convince the others not to do it if that person's getting good results from it.
Exactly. We get that a lot. So people, you know, even within a training group, and I think training groups are great because I think training with others can often bring you on to the next level. But you do get people in training groups saying, oh, she's running that for 5K now, and I'm doing the same session as her. Why aren't I getting there? You know, and it's important to realize all the factors that are going into performance, you know, not least, unfortunately, genetics. You know, I remember the first triathlon coach I ever had. First thing he said to me, 80% is genetics. You know, we can only do something with the other 20%. So whether that's true, I'm not going to, you know, put a figure on it. But, you know, we all have to respect what we're born with and make the best of it, don't we?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, what do you kind of say to your athletes when you're trying to talk to them? Do you explain what we've just talked about those individual differences?
Sure, yeah, and I think everyone's motivated by different things, aren't they? You know, there are people who want to complete a race, there are people who want to get time, they want to beat their mate, they just want the enjoyment. You know, it's so many different factors. You know, maybe doing it for a charity, whatever it might be, and you've got to tap into that. And then the next stage is to sort of look at their performance, whether it's, say, in running, what is it that's stopping them getting to where they want to be? Is it the training volume? Is it the schedule? Is it the style? Is it a lack of strength? You know, there's so many different things which can play into increasing performance. And that's the beauty of our sport, isn't it? That there's always an area to work on.
Yeah, no, those, yeah, there is, like the kind of like the cycling thing with Dave Brailsford, the 1% thing. You know,
Yeah,
if we improve 20 different things by 1%, it's going to help, right?
exactly.
And there's a lot of factors that we can take into account when we're coaching running or any endurance sport, for sure.
I mean, you've already got some aerodynamics going on there in your head, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I love that. It's so easy to
That's a
train
1%.
multiple times a day. There's 1% on top, and just a quick shower and a brush off, and it's done. But you know, I think it is important for people to understand that there are factors, especially at the recreational level. You know, with the females as well, with things like their cycle and how that's going to affect them. Obviously, what the elites do is very different, maybe, to what the sort of general population would do, and you have to kind of talk through those things. And also, the big thing that I think was really good about 2021 is the normalization about talking around the menopause as well, and the perimenopause, and how that can affect women in general, but also within the sporting scene and endurance athletes. And you know, I think, do you come up with those challenges as well? Those challenges there within your roles?
I do. I don't claim to be an expert on it at all. And in those cases, I'll usually refer the women to certain other, you know, to others, or to read papers that, you know, I've seen. You know, I don't really feel qualified to give detailed advice on that. I'll just say, look, so and so says if she runs at this time of the cycle, it produces better results. This paper says that for most women, if you do it in this part of the cycle, you'll get a better performance.
Yeah,
you know, but you know, I wouldn't like to, you know, go too detailed in that, just because I don't feel qualified to. Likewise with some of the strength work, you know, although I know a fair bit about strength and how to build, you know, various muscle groups and so on, I would always defer to someone who knows more than me when it comes to, you know, rehabilitating after an injury, for example.
Yeah, no, I agree. Around the sort of menopause and things like that, I'm very much the same as you. It's always about a referral. And actually, it's interesting what you say there about the strength as well. I think for coaches, it can be a challenge, can't it, to and I'm a big referrer where it comes down
Yeah.
to specialists and whatever.
Yeah.
But coaches find that hard. So I'm assuming you always do that in whatever situation, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always ready to admit that I don't know the answer. Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah.
Yeah, I was once taught in my journey of coaching that one of the best answers you can give is I don't actually know the answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Rather than the coaching blag that we can see from time to time out there in the world of coaching. But I think not causing confusion among any athlete, whether they're an ultra runner or whether they're a 5K couch to 5K, it's really important to keep that message clear. And I think as we've talked through this so far, you've pointed out there those individual differences. I think anyone who's listening and is trying to get through to their first ultra, there is a lot of information now on YouTube and books and whatever. The ultra world has started to grow, and there's a lot of opinion about math running, zone 2 running, high intensity interval training around it, running up and down hills, rep after rep after rep. The bottom line is to be honest, until you try, you're not really going to know, are you?
And perhaps in ultra running as much as in triathlon, a 50K, is that sort of the what you'd call the sort of the shortest ultra run?
Yeah, I think that's widely accepted in the ultra world. I would
that's
say
very different to doing a multi-day event, isn't it? Or a 100-miler. It's a completely different bag, isn't it? So, you've got to. I think I heard one of your previous guests talking about specificity, and you did as well. And I think, especially when you get near to your event, you've got to be specific, whatever the event. When you get, everyone's got different theories about base training, how to periodize, all the rest of it. But if you're going to perform at your best in a particular event, your training close to that event has got to include some specificity. And if you can get out on the actual course, like you were saying in this episode, and try out, especially perhaps the trickiest bits of that course, then that is going to help you probably beyond any amount of, doing a 20-mile run at zone 2 instead of zone 1,
Yeah. I agree. I think, the whole idea, social media is great. It's, it gives you insight to what people are doing, and the ultra runners that I'm following, which is quite a lot of ultra runners on Instagram, for example, there is this whole idea of doing a recce of the event is becoming more popular, which I traditionally have done. I didn't do it for my Ironman in 2015, but actually all of my ultras that I've actually done, I've been there before, at least, even if it was just for a walk, just to see what it looks like, really.
Yeah, I mean, when I was doing duathlon seriously, where possible, sometimes it's not possible. Like maybe with your Ironman, you probably couldn't get on the roads that you were cycling in the event because of traffic and so on. But certainly, I would try wherever possible to go to the course for duathlon and actually ride it at just below race pace, maybe 3 or 4 days before the race itself. I think you can gain masses by knowing a course.
Yeah, I mean, on my half Ironman in 2014, that was the first time I'd stepped up to that distance, and it was down in Exmoor National Park, the Ironman branded one at Wimbleball Lake.
Hard one. Yeah.
We got there on the Thursday, and we went to see the event village because it was being set up. And my dad, he's never done any triathlons in his life, but he was quite keen that I went and did a loop of the course because it was a 2-looper. And actually what was really funny is I got down into this village coming off a massive hill and then took a left turn, which was a real left turn, sharp uphill. And I snapped my chain.
There you go.
And the best part about it is everyone else was going to the event village and they could see I was in trouble. So someone actually racked my bike on their roof and let me jump in their car and took me back. Obviously we got the chain fixed and got it all sorted out. But had I not have done that, I could have done that in a race and that would have been game over.
Yep.
So I was really lucky in that sense that happened to me in a recce ride. So, and again, Wendover Woods, which is probably a place not too many people have been, but it's where the Centurion 50 miler is at Wendover Woods, and not far from sort of Milton Keynes and
I know. I've done a run there. Yeah, not a 50 miler, but yeah.
I mean, it's a 10-mile loop, 5 laps, and you think, oh yeah, that's all right. It's not too hilly there. It's 10,000 feet of elevation. So I thought I'd entered this race and I thought I've got to go and have a look at what this is about, because it's suggesting that we're going to do 2,000 feet of elevation in some woodland in a fairly flat area of England.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay. And I went there and I managed 4.5 miles of a 10-mile loop because the elevation was unbelievably hard. And that specificity was the whole point. It was really important that we did that. So, you know, I think the way that endurance running works, I think you're right. 35K basic ultra running up to 100 miles as a one day event, if you like, they are very different within themselves, let alone the marathon desarbs or the whatever else it is that we do. So, yeah, in terms of,
it's going to affect your equipment choice as well. It's going to affect your fueling strategy. So many things.
Yeah. And I think, you know, in terms of that and, you know, all those principles of training that we talk about and what athletes should and shouldn't be doing, when it comes to the mind with endurance sport, what's your kind of approach and thoughts on the mental side of it?
Oh, well, you can't underestimate its importance. That's the first thing. I think when I first take on people to coach, the first thing I look for is the level of motivation. Yeah. And I would say always the more motivated people are, the better they will do. And the clearer they are about their reasons for doing the event or the sport that they're doing. If you're just going into it thinking to see what it's like, just to, you know, without a real drive, yeah, you might get something out of it, but you're not going to achieve as highly as if you've got a real drive. And I certainly had that drive when I was younger, and I haven't got it now, which is why I'm not really racing at the moment. I'm hoping it will come back. But, you know, my drive was trying to win or trying to beat a time. And, you know, with age, that becomes less and less realistic. And so that motivation for me is gone. Not to say I won't race again, but it's really important to have the mind foremost, I think, as a coach, to understand the mind of your athlete and understand what is driving your athlete is vital. And as the athlete, you need to, sometimes you don't have to ask yourself why. I mean, people say, oh, you've got to know your why. Sometimes you don't even, I mean, when I was racing, that didn't even enter my mind. I was so driven, I didn't have to ask why. It was just duathlon. I wanted to get better at it. I wanted to do it. And that was all I ever thought about.
Yeah.
So, you know, sometimes it's that obvious. Whereas, you know, for other people, it's more of a conscious thing. You know, all right, I've got to get fit. Right, I'm decided I'm going to do running. Okay, what's my aim? Why do I want to do it? You know, and have a real goal and a motivation. For some people, that is vital. And I think as coaches, we have to tap into that and look what changes are needed from where the athlete is now to get to where they are, and to keep nurturing the mind as well as the body. So as a coach, it's about praise, it's about honesty, and about listening to the athlete and understanding how they are viewing their sessions, which may be different to how you're seeing it from an outside point of view.
Yeah, no, and I think that sort of answers that last section of that intro that I did before we ran the actual credits as well, you know. So why do we do this? And I think whether you're a coach or the athlete, for both to understand why is a really important thing. And, you know, I've got to be honest, my own journey, you say you've listened to the previous episode before we came on. You said you listened to me talking about my journey.
Yeah.
The why, when I'm successful, the why is very clear. You know, it really is quite clear. And I think, you know, you're probably saying that there with the level of motivation when you first meet someone. If you can really identify what it is, and like you said for yourself, you were that driven, the idea of progress was, you know, wanting to progress and get better. That's enough, and that's fine. But that idea of the, you know, the recreational athlete, if you like, there's got to be something that drives us to get up at 6 a.m. to go for a run. Before we go to work, right? It can't be just we're going to do that, because it doesn't work like that, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I heard in your case, you know, it was a different form of pain from what you were feeling elsewhere in your life. You know, for other people, it might be just a social thing, a chance to go to meet people, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. You know, for others, it just maybe that it makes them feel good for the rest of the day if they've been for a swim in the morning or a run in the morning. You know, but you can go right from that through to achieving a certain time, which, you know, they've got written all over their house. You know, So they want to do a 6 hour half Ironman, saying they've got sub-6 plastered all over the house, and that work. Every time they open the fridge, it says, "Remember what you're doing." You know, that's good for some people, and for others, it's just not appropriate. You know.
Yeah, so I think we clearly both agree then that mindset and the mind is a crucial factor when it comes to endurance sport, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd be interested actually to hear from your ultra runners. You know how the mind plays tricks on them, and how the mental process works once you get into the different stages of ultra. Because we talk about in running associating and disassociating. I certainly associated. Whenever I raced, I was always focused on the race itself and my goal and how I was running, where I was going, how far it was to go, what pace I'd need, and so on. I think in an ultra race that probably becomes impossible. You can't maintain that level of focus for 100 miles. It would destroy you. It would add to the fatigue, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I've had some interesting guests so far with perspectives on that, but I've got a couple that I'm speaking to at the moment. They're actually elsewhere in the world doing ultras right now. No promises to anyone who's listening, but if we can get them on, we'll get them on, because they've got some funny stories about how the mind starts playing tricks when you're out there on your ability to even put one more foot in front of the other. Sure. And things like that. So I think there is probably, and I've certainly felt that, and I would call myself a very junior ultra runner in terms of my experience. My experience is I've done a 70 miler, so I've done the 100k plus distance. I haven't reached 100 miles yet, but sort of dabbling around the 35 mile and the 50 mile distance on the others. There's aspects in there where the mind really did play tricks. So because you can't even run it like you're running a marathon. It's not even the same. So the mind it's a clever thing, but it's also a funny thing because it will trick you. And I think you're right. It potentially is something that's worth digging into with the ultra world to see what I'm sure there's some funny stories in there as well. People come up with all sorts of things while they're out there feeling a bit delusional about what they're thinking, and it doesn't quite make sense. So no, the mindset is big. So I've got a couple more things I want to kind of focus on just for a couple of minutes each on both of them, sort of in other parts of your life then. So you also host your own podcast.
I do. Cambridge Endurance Sports Podcast. It's probably a little bit more niche than yours because it's got that word Cambridge in it, which maybe limits the audience. Although I've noticed it's now being downloaded in 50 countries. So Cambridge stretches far and wide, obviously.
Yeah, no, I think obviously. So if the listeners haven't worked it out, I'm from Cambridge as well, and I think because of the university, I guess sometimes that name Cambridge is seen worldwide and is recognised. Maybe, I don't know, in the same way that we'd recognise Harvard maybe from the American system or whatever. But I think I've listened to a few of your episodes. Very interesting. Some very interesting people on there as well. Obviously, you're going through that process of talking to a lot of people now as well within the endurance space. And what are you kind of getting out of the podcast world?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really sort of creating, I suppose, a documentation of what this city or people connected with this city have done in endurance terms, over the recent past and going into the future. So I've had a mixture of older and younger people, and it's just great to hear all these different perspectives and different stories of sport. It wasn't intended to be that, actually. When I first started the podcast, I was hoping to do something a bit more comical, a bit more lighthearted, having some up-to-date news and views on what was going on in local runs and so on. But then obviously COVID came along and it mutated into more or less just an interview show, and that's how it is at the moment. It might change in the future, I don't know, but that would be good. And I'm hoping indeed very soon to talk to yourself and a couple of others about the Hope Alive tour, which you've been a part of. And I've already been told I've got to mention a purple wheelie bin at some point, so we can look forward to that.
Yeah, no, I think actually our listeners can look forward to hearing about that in terms of a few of the guys that did the tour with us this time. But I think you're going to have myself. I'm there as a tour director. Michael is there as a tour director, and then Ian, who ran, and we're all going to come on your show and talk about it. So we'll certainly point the guys in that direction so they can have a listen to that episode, as well as probably hearing about it from a few of the guys that were on the tour as well on here. And that in itself is a very interesting story, and something that we look to develop going forward. So, you know,
that's a different type of ultra running again, isn't it?
It is, and it's very about what we just spoke about, mindset and the mind, and understanding why you're there to do it. And you know, you're having to basically live off 4 hours on, 4 hours off is kind of how it works for basically 3.5 days. So you know, we'll go into depth in that on your podcast for sure. And then we're both from Cambridge, and prior, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, prior to 2012 there, or 2011, Cambridge was lacking any sort of half marathon or any sort of big race within the city. And basically there was if I look at history, there was a half marathon once upon a time. Maybe back in the 80s, was it? I don't know.
Well, I did I think I did the last event, the last edition of that, and it was 94 or 95 was the last one.
Okay. And then, so there we are, sort of 2011?
2012 was the first one.
So 2012, and you were a big part of bringing back the half marathon to Cambridge.
Yeah, it's all my fault, really. Yeah. First of all, I have to correct you. I've been in Cambridge for getting on for 35 years ago, but I'm not from Cambridge. I'm a South Londoner.
Right. Okay.
Right. So can't take that out of me, I'm afraid. So I was organising small races, 5Ks, 10Ks, a little triathlon, and was very much aware that the city lacked a half marathon. So I formed a little steering group, if you like, and we tried to get a half marathon off the ground, but there was a lot of resistance from the councils. I think race organisers throughout the world will know what it's like dealing with local authorities. Sometimes it can be good, sometimes not so good. And eventually things changed. Eventually I got to a stage where I was meeting with the council, and they were basically approved the idea, but they said, this is Cambridge, we can't have one of your little events, we've got to have a massive event. So I then went and spoke to One Step Beyond, just OSB they're known as now, and because I'd done some of their duathlons and triathlons, and turned out that one of their partners there was also moving to Milton, just near Cambridge, and brought them in, and we got involved, and I'm still just as involved now. I live for a week on Midsummer Common basically every year, and throughout the year there's bits and pieces that need doing, and we've grown from a couple of thousand runners up to 12,000 in the 11 editions that we've now had.
Yeah, so 2022 was the 11th edition.
That's correct.
It was the first one that I didn't do.
Oh, really?
So I did the first 10, and last October 21, due to the pandemic, actually Cambridge was unique because it got a 2020 race in literally
1 week before.
Yeah, 1 week before lockdown.
Yeah.
And then it managed to get an October 21 event in. So it actually did continue its continuation of running every year.
That's right.
Was there, to your knowledge, is there many of us that did the first 10?
I don't know. I can probably try and find out. There are not many, certainly not many. I've met 1 or 2 people who have told me that they've done every one, but there aren't many.
Yeah, no, and I missed this year for injury, and I was gutted.
Yeah, we were talking about maybe trying to do a special medal or something for people who've done every one. Maybe when we've done 20, we'll do that.
Yeah. So, you know,
we need a legacy scheme like Ironman, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And well, you know, that's all changing with UTMB as well in the ultra running world. So, you know, it's good. But, you know, in terms of being on board with a big event like that, is it stressful process?
Yeah, we've had a few stressful moments, not least the year when Cambridge was under a few inches of snow on the Friday night before the race, and everyone was saying, you've got to cancel it. And of course, on race morning, the snow had melted and it was perfect. But we were very close that year to having to call it. And then, of course, you know, you get medical emergencies, but we have a great team, and we've learned over the years how to provide the best medical care. So, you know, that can be stressful. Route changes, you know, roadworks suddenly appear on your route, and in the week of the race, that sort of thing. Yeah, but so it can be stressful, but it is, again, very fulfilling as well.
Yeah. And now we, being the runners, we get to run through King's College and through
Yeah,
Jesus
and
College,
Jesus,
and
yeah,
it's quite unique now, I would say. It's so certainly represents the prestige of Cambridge University as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've probably seen the pictures. Hopefully you got some individual pictures of yourself running through King's College. I think they're pretty unique, aren't they?
Yeah, no, they are. And, you don't get too many races with something like that in the background. That isn't London Marathon or New York Marathon or whatever. This is a world-known sort of chapel, and it's a great picture. That photographer sitting there is getting some great photographs. So, yeah, no.
I need to point out actually that I've won every edition because I've been the lead bike on every one.
Oh, have you been the lead bike?
Yeah, my running's not quite that level, but yeah. So I can still say I've crossed the line first in every edition.
So who won the 2022 event?
Oh my God! Right, I've got to put my brain in gear now. It's a South African guy.
Right.
What was his name? Is it something like? I'm gonna have to look it up.
Yeah.
It was great because in October it was a local guy called Jonathan who won it, and he was so humble crossing the line. He just said, "Oh yeah, I'm really pleased with that." This guy who won this year, his arms were up in the air. He kissed the tarmac. He was posing for every camera around. So again, it just shows the difference between people, and how different things mean different things to whatever. Yeah, Nick, I think his name. I can't remember his surname now.
Yeah, no, I know of Jonathan. In fact, I saw Jonathan very recently at a local intra club league last night, actually, the night before we recorded this.
Yeah.
And I saw him, and he sort of just looked at me and he said, "I recognise you. I think, are you the boom guy?" And that's all he said to me. And I know exactly what he meant and exactly why he meant. And actually, if people tune into your podcast with us, you might find out what that is. But yeah, so he's a very nice guy, I think, and hopefully I'll get to chat to him at some point as well on the show. So excellent. Right.
I don't want to be accused of just focusing on the men, because we had a great women's race as well and this year. And again, I've forgotten the name of the girl from Tunbridge who won the women's race, and Georgie Schweening, another local girl. She was second this year. And we've had a real good field in the women as well. So that's just as important as the men, obviously.
Yeah, I think we had another local girl come and try her first half marathon, stepping up from sort of 5 and 10K, currently training in the States. Holly
Archer. Yeah, she was third, I believe.
Yeah. And I met Holly a couple of times, and we've had a chat about certain things, and she's obviously looking into longer distance events as well. So
that's good news. Yeah.
I don't know if that was part of her process, but speaking to a few people after, I haven't actually asked her yet, but
yeah, she was definitely leading in early on, and I think she faded a bit, but still pretty decent.
It was good to see, actually, because I kind of knew her as the indoor British champion. That's kind of how I met her. But that was about it. So then to see her at a half marathon was great, because obviously being endurance-based people, we're a bit biased towards the longer distance stuff where I am. So yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, no, the Cambridge Half has been a great place for me and my running club over the years so far, and long may it continue, Ben.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, going back to what you're saying, I think we're going to see that a lot more, and we've certainly seen it in triathlon. A lot of the top Ironman triathletes are now ones that started at shorter distances, and I think in the ultra world as well. I don't know the names of these guys, but I was certainly reading and hearing about how some of the top runners are ex-track runners now who are dominating in the ultra world as well. So, you can't that natural speed helps even when you're doing 100 miles, doesn't it? If you've got it,
it's not absolutely. Things like the power they can create and things like that. It all makes a difference, I think, when they're on the long distance stuff as well.
Sure.
So, quick question to finish off with, then.
Yeah.
If you were going to give someone sort of maybe 3 top tips that wanted to get into maybe ultra running or endurance-based running, you've kind of mentioned a few things as we've gone through, but what would you say your sort of top tips are to someone who's getting involved in long endurance-based events?
Learn as much as you can about what you've let yourself in for. So find out who's doing it, why they're doing it, what the event actually involves. Build into it gradually. Don't be in too much of a rush. talk to people who are doing it. If you can find people to train with, better still. You know, if you don't like them, you can always drop out again. And prepare yourself properly for whatever event you've chosen for. Don't be in too much of a hurry, like I've just mentioned. Look into every aspect that can get you there and make the experience enjoyable all the way. Because if you're not enjoying it, you probably do that one and then you won't do another one, will you? So enjoy it from the start. Take it one step at a time. Learn as much as you can about the event. You know, then obviously beyond that, there's a lot. Then all the other things come in, like training structure. Maybe you want a coach. You've got to think about your fueling, or equipment, all the rest of it. But before you get to any of that, enjoy it. Be informed, and respect what it is you're going to do, and do it, build into it, fully aware of what it is you're going into.
Yeah, no, great advice. That absolutely great advice. So Ben, thanks very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate having you on the show.
Actually, fantastic.
If people want to sort of follow you and look into what we mentioned, where can they find you?
Yeah, so probably the best place is to find Cambridge Endurance Sports Podcast on Facebook. I'm not as good as you on Instagram, but it's there. I think it's maybe at Cam Endurance Sports, something like that. But I think they'll find it. Yeah, and of course the podcast is there on iTunes and Spotify, all the usual platforms.
Brilliant. So thanks for coming on the show once again. And if anyone who has been listening today found that interesting, please do share that on with anyone that you think might get some benefit from it. And hopefully if there's some points in there that you've got questions on, you could always get in contact with myself or Ben, and we can maybe expand.
Happy to answer any questions. Always happy.
Yeah, no, excellent. So guys, that's another show coming to an end, but I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and I very much hope you could give the podcast a rating. So guys, just go to whichever platform you're on, give us a little star rating, and also give us a little comment or review if the platform allows you to. But for now, I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I hope we can meet here again to discuss more on the Ultra Running Podcast with me, Coach Marshy.